YouTube. Today we're going to look at a video by Badmouse, and it's entitled Why Communism is Important. I'm not going to address the entirety of the video. I felt personally that he made some cogent points that were very relevant and pertinent in relation to actual communists and the socialist or communist movement, but which I feel are ultimately unnecessary, as communism isn't going to go anywhere anytime soon, if ever, at least not in its present form. So, let's watch a brief clip from that video, and then we will return to me and my meandering contemplations.
This is what I'm getting at. If you reject the label because it's alienating, you reject all research into why people have these alienatable views in the first place. And you will never solve the contradictions this way. Being communists, it would be good to observe what the outcomes have been of removing this label, and indeed we can. You could, for example, look at the Venus Project by the late Jacques Fresco, or maybe someone like Paul Mason and his popularizing of the term post-capitalism. Then we might look at the Zeitgeist movement, which was probably America's most famous attempt at a new synthesis. When I look at these, I can't help but feel cynical. Does it really appear like any of these are going anywhere in the grand scale of things? The Zeitgeist movement is basically dead in the water at this point. It was submerged with conspiracy theories and a fundamental lack of any material basis to begin with, which limited its ability to evolve. Post-capitalism, at least if Mason is anything to go by, appears to be effectively conceding defeat, as if we could ever peacefully transition away from our dilemma. And as for the Venus Project, well, it's admirable to see this kind of stuff, but it's hardly expanded despite valiant efforts. It remains largely a singular communal project. And I can't help but feel this suffers into the futurologist-style post-capitalism scenario without any theoretical basis. Videos like these attract a hell of a lot of views, sure, but how effective is internet amazement porn at creating a movement? I think it stands to reason that we should not have a deviation without also having a continuity. To reject or move away from the term because it's perceived to have failed or doesn't jam well would never be a particularly sound method in any other discipline or field.
Okay, so let's just quickly review what Badmouse has said here. His assertions are essentially that RBE proponents reject the communist label, and that this is at least part of why movements like TVP and TZM have flopped or failed. He expands on this to say that because these movements have abandoned the label and theoretical models of communism, they have no material basis, and thus could not adapt and evolve to mounting challenges. All of this, I feel, is absurd. Jacques Fresco and Peter Joseph have been explicit about their conscious decision to reject communism as a theoretical framework for a functioning socio-economic system. Neither TVP or TZM were conceived of as continuations nor derivations of communism, and to assert that they are is to illegitimately appropriate these organizations, and to deny their autonomy. The confusion, I think, stems from the fact that many RBE proponents are also communists, socialists, or anarchists, or at least sympathetic to an accommodating of these ideologies, at least in part. The appropriation of the RBE concept by communists and socialists is something that greatly aggravates me, because these communists and socialists that do this invariably have an extremely limited understanding of the RBE and limited history of interaction with proponents. In short, they don't understand the theoretical basis for the RBE, so they assert there isn't one. I'd like to also comment on a few other specific statements made by Badmouse, because I feel they are relevant and pertinent critiques of these movements. I won't be touching on the post-capitalism portion because I'm not very familiar with this group. The first statement is that TZM is essentially dead in the water and was riddled with conspiracy theories. Both of these observations are true, but I felt it was important to note that TZM was reorganized into the unofficial activist arm of TVP by Peter Joseph, with its primary goal always being the dissemination of information and the recruitment of proponents. By both measures, TZM was a success, at least initially, and its eventual recession was the result of a painful split with TVP, and the fact that Peter Joseph was seen by most followers to be the leader, so that when he rejected this role, interest quickly waned. And most importantly, when TZM appropriated then subsequently adopted communist and socialist rhetoric, it immediately met all the entrenched social and political stigma associated with communism and socialism, and quickly bled many supporters, who then understandably had no idea what TZM stood for anymore, or what unique ideas or perspectives it offered to warrant membership. Essentially, and ironically, communism was the nail in the coffin for TZM, which is why it has been superseded by individual activists such as myself trying to reassert and redefine the concept and theory of the RBE. By the way, if you're really curious about what the practical application of the RBE might look like, please visit the Auravana project, link in the description. Travis Grant has committed himself to the incredible task of defining the material and functional models of the RBE and greatly influenced me. The second comment I want to address is Badmouse's observation on the failure of TVP to catch on and proliferate. Again, this is a misunderstanding of the organization, which was ultimately one man's, Jacques Fresco's, imaginings of how an RBE might materialize. Though TVP has attempted to develop working models, its main objective was also always communication and the dissemination of information. Jacques Fresco was always insistent that the purpose of TVP was to create educational materials. His philosophy boiled down to the understanding that a post-scarcity civilization was the common objective of all ideologies, and that before this commonality could be realized, people must first imagineer the future. Of course, Jacques relished the notion that an actual circular city could be built in his lifetime, and he pushed also to that end. But to assume that this was his primary goal is to project a hubris and narrow-mindedness onto a person unjustifiably. I think Badmouse's confusion concerning TVP likewise stems from Jacques' accommodation and use of communist rhetoric in the form of critiques against capitalism. TVP, because of its recognition of and sympathy towards communism in more recent times, became confused with communism, and like TZM, and largely because of TZM, bled followers and supporters. It really is ironic how incapable Badmouse is of seeing how inherently destructive, unproductive, and futile communism is. He at once criticizes RBE movements for not being outright communist, while being utterly ignorant of the fact that these movements were most successful when they weren't associated with communism, and were indeed founded and conceived of as being alternatives to communism. As for the material or theoretical bases, I'm not sure what TVP or TZM is missing. Perhaps if Badmouse ever sees this video, he can respond and clarify this for me. I suppose if one is not really aware of how, when, and why these organizations were developed, then maybe the answer is that Badmouse just didn't care to take the time to investigate before making his video. That's my presupposition anyways. I don't know. Maybe Badmouse and I could have a conversation and discuss this point, and also why I feel that communism is destructive, unproductive, and futile. That's all for now. Thank you for watching.